Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem brought the Trump administration's message on immigration to Illinois this week, while immigrant rights advocates delivered a message of their own in a rally outside the State House. From Capitol News, Illinois, it's Friday, May 9th, 2025, and this is Capitol Cast. Hello and welcome to Capitol Cast, a regular podcast of Capitol News, Illinois. I'm Peter Hancock, and with me this week are Ben Szalinski and Jade Aubrey. Both of you, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks.
So both of you were on hand this week when Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem came to Springfield to focus the media spotlight on the Trump administration's immigration policy. It's no secret that the president and Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker have sharply different views on that, and they are not afraid to take each other on directly in the media. It's also no secret that Governor Pritzker might someday soon want the president's job. So Secretary Noem, a former governor of South Dakota, came to Springfield to criticize Illinois' sitting governor, J.B. Pritzker, specifically calling out the state's so-called sanctuary policies. Let's listen to part of what she had to say.
Governors like J.B. Pritzker don't care if gangbangers, if murderers, rapists, and pedophiles roam free in his state. If they are here illegally, he's going to protect them. And for most of my career, I have fought these kinds of criminals and fought to protect my people in South Dakota, but also across the country. And that is what President Trump is focused on here today.
Okay, so Ben, let's start with you. She was focusing attention on what people refer to as the state's sanctuary policies, saying that Governor Pritzker and the people behind those policies want to protect illegal immigrants regardless of what they might do while they're here. What are those policies specifically? What are they talking about when they say sanctuary policies?
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean that anybody illegally in the United States gets to just run free and do whatever they want in the state. Basically, the laws prevent Illinois law enforcement from making arrests of people in the state based on their immigration status only. Now, doesn't mean police can't arrest people who are legally in the United States for other crimes. What it really just means is that the state's laws prohibit law enforcement from cooperating with immigration authorities to enforce federal immigration law. That also doesn't mean, though, that federal immigration authorities can't come to Illinois and do their job. That would be unconstitutional for the state to prohibit the federal government from operating in the state. So it's really a policy that simply regulates Illinois law enforcement. It does not have any bearing on if the federal government is able to make arrests of people solely on immigration status in the state of Illinois.
Okay, and so while she was here, she was giving that news conference and making a statement. What seemed to be the purpose behind that, other than to get the news media to cover her? I mean, what was the overall purpose for staging that visual demonstration there?
Yeah, part of me is still kind of wondering why as well. Like, what is the actual answer to that question? But it certainly seemed like the main goal was to get attention in a state with a Democrat governor in a sanctuary state and get media attention to maybe drum up some controversy in local media, get the people of Illinois to pay more attention to this issue of immigration. She was in town for all of 2 hours. She landed at 8:30 and was back at the airport at 10:30. So, it really wasn't a lot of time because she just simply, staged a couple photos, held a news conference, and was on her way out the door. So it really seemed like a lot of it was to really just criticize J.B. Pritzker, who I think it's worth noting is not the one who signed the sanctuary state law. That was Republican Governor Bruce Rauner in 2017. It seemed like a lot of this was really just that, J.B. Pritzker has become kind of a thorn in the side of the Trump administration. They're kind of fed up with, the governor's poking fun at them a lot and on the national stage. He's very openly critical, more than most Democrats in the country are. So I think they were trying to use this as an opportunity to hit back at J.B. Pritzker.
Okay, and so you mentioned that she flew in early in the morning, and then there was this motorcade that the both of you were in. And if you've never been in either a presidential motorcade or a motorcade with a major federal official like a cabinet secretary, it can be quite an experience. Jade, I understand that was your first experience in that kind of a motorcade. What was it like? You talked about some kind of scary moments there.
Yeah, it was very surreal. I mean, we got there bright and early, and we waited for almost an hour and a half for her to arrive and for the motorcade to start. And then they drove us to a federal field office on the other side of Springfield and didn't tell us where we were going. And they said, photographers only, get out of the car. So I'm walking into this building. I'm the first media person to walk in, and we have no idea where we're at, why we're in here. And they walked us into this side room. And my first kind of take of the room, as I'm looking around, it's a small room. There's 2 tall steel doors in there, and there's several ICE officers and other obvious federal agents in there, and there's 2 men who are getting their fingerprints scanned, and we're still have no idea why we're here. And then Noem walks in with another ICE official, and they start talking about the uptick in violence they're seeing in Illinois against ICE officers. And she's asking different questions about how ICE operations are going in the state. And then she walks over to these 2 men, and they're not dressed like they should be there. They're in basketball shorts. One of them is wearing Crocs. And everyone else in this room is, fully in uniform. And she asked if either of them speak English. And the officer told her that yes, one of them did. He said that they were 2 men who were from Guatemala. They had picked them up and arrested them on battery charges and found that they were illegal immigrants and that they were going to be detained in either Missouri or Indiana soon and deported back to Guatemala eventually. So she started asking the man questions of if he understood why he was picked up, if he understood that he was going to be deported, if he understood his charges brought against him. And he answered yes to all the questions except the charge question. He said that he wasn't quite sure what she was asking. She asked if he knew that he was being charged with battery, and he didn't understand. So it was just very surreal. And when she first walked in and talked with the ICE agent and not with the 2 men, she stood right in front of the reporters and angled her body towards us. And it just seemed very posed. And later, Governor Pritzker did call, that section of the day more of a photo op, and it did kind of seem to come off that way. We were escorted back into the vans, again, not told where we were going. And then we drove through town back to the podium spot where we did the other press conference, and it was just really crazy experience for sure.
So I guess the purpose of that was so that you could see an arrestee being processed through the system. I mean, was there any particular message that they were trying to get across about the way people were being treated or the way they're handled?
Yeah, it definitely just seemed to make a statement of the fact that there are people in Illinois they're still picking up and processing. The other man was getting his fingerprints scanned as the entire little, photo op, as Pritzker called it, was happening, and she was just kind of talking with the ICE officials. It did seem like they just wanted the media in there and to talk about these issues with them, and the men had said they just picked them up that day, and so it was more of just, getting that message out. I agree.
Okay, and then she had that news conference where she made that statement that we just listened to a little bit ago, but Ben, she also was there with family members, a number of people. She referred to them as angel families. I guess that's a term for people who have lost loved ones at the hands of people who are in the country illegally. So what was going on? What was she saying about those families, and what were some of their stories?
Yeah, there was 3 different families from around Illinois someone in their family was more than likely a victim of murder by somebody illegally in the United States. And they were really just telling their story about who their family member was and basically just kind of how the case happened. Some of the examples were not recent. One of the people there was, a family member of a victim who was murdered back in, I think, 2011. But the point they were really trying to get across was that, they don't want what happened to their family to happen to any other families in Illinois, and that they believe that the state of Illinois needs to get on the same page as the Trump administration when it comes to immigration and cracking down on illegal immigration, and make sure that people who are legally in the United States are not harbored unnecessarily in the state, and that state law enforcement should have the ability to participate with immigration officials on enforcing immigration law.
Okay, and there was also a family, though, she referred to one that was a fairly recent murder victim from here in the Springfield area, Emma Schaefer. What was the story behind that?
Yeah, so it was very notable which family was not there, and it was the family that was the subject of Kristi Noem's news conference. So Emma Schaefer was a girl in her 20s who was a local progressive activist in Springfield. She worked on a lot of criminal justice issues. She was a big proponent of the Pretrial Fairness Act. And back in 2023, she was allegedly murdered, stabbed to death in her home by her boyfriend. The boyfriend had previous felony convictions. There had been some unsuccessful deportation efforts in prior years for him. Ultimately, he wound up stabbing his girlfriend, Emma Schaefer, in Springfield 2 years ago. And Kristi Noem wanted to use that as an example of somebody who was illegally in the United States, as this man was from Mexico. And she was trying to make the point that, hey, and this happens in Springfield too, and that this poor girl was murdered by somebody who was illegally here. The problem, however, is that her family was down the block protesting Kristi Noem actually being in Springfield. They had no idea. I don't think anyone really had any idea that Kristi Noem was going to bring up this case. They were completely opposed to her visit, and they were extremely upset that their daughter's name was mentioned by the Homeland Security Secretary in a political way. And Kristi Noem's response during the news conference, when reporters asked her if she actually knew the story of Emma Schaefer and knew that her family was protesting her visit down the street, she said she had attempted to reach out to her family and was unsuccessful in doing that. She wasn't aware of Emma Schaefer's activist background or anything like that. So that really just, she came to town with this message about illegal immigration and brought other families who wanted to be there out to talk about their stories and get attention to what happened to them and to the issue overall. But she chose to talk about a family that didn't want to be mentioned in this context, and it really, took the entire point of the news conference away, it seemed, to, all the stories at the end of the day were about Kristi Noem mentioning a family that didn't want to be mentioned, not the families that actually did want attention to their case.
And that also, it brings up another question that's been on my mind. How much media attention did the administration actually get out of this visit? Did it make national news? Was it in, national newspapers or magazines or cable television?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it really got any attention outside Illinois. It certainly got a lot of attention both in Springfield and in the Chicago media market and other markets around the state. But we really didn't see a whole lot of attention outside the state. There was a Fox News regional reporter who was there in attendance, but other than that, there wasn't really any other national reporters. I think part of the reason that this didn't really take off is that this wasn't really just a new controversy for the Trump administration. It's not unusual that they have, overstepped their boundaries with victims of other families, that they've, said comments that are very controversial. So in the grand scheme of things in the Trump White House, this was almost, the day-to-day thing where a cabinet secretary is out making a point, gets some facts wrong, makes a lot of people angry in the place that the cabinet secretary is visiting. So no, it didn't really seem to rise to the level of something new and interesting about the Trump administration.
Okay, well, you did mention there were protests taking place in various parts of the city, including right outside the State House here in front of the Abraham Lincoln statue on the east side of the State House. If you've ever seen that, it's a common gathering area. People like the backdrop with Abe Lincoln looking over their shoulder and the Capitol Dome in the background. But this was a protest of immigration rights advocates as well as a number of state legislators who were specifically calling out Kristi Noem for being here and criticizing the message that she was bringing. I want to listen to State Senator Omar Aquino, who is a Chicago Democrat who spoke at that rally.
Because in this state, in that building with these people and a lot of community members, we have worked hard to pass monumental legislation throughout the years to say that we are a welcoming state here in the state of Illinois. That we are going to provide you health care no matter what document you may or may not have. That we are going to provide you an opportunity to get a decent education in this state no matter what document you may or may not have.
Okay, and so he mentioned a couple of policy areas there, one having to do with health care and one having to do with education. Ben, the health care policy actually is on the agenda during this legislative session. There are a couple of programs, the health benefits for immigrant adults, which provides like Medicaid-like health coverage for people who otherwise would qualify for Medicaid but don't simply because of their citizenship status or their immigration status. That covers people about age 42 to 64. And then there's health benefits for immigrant seniors, HBIS, which covers people age 65 and over. The governor has actually proposed closing one of those as part of the budget. How much attention is that getting? As you know, we're winding down toward the end of the session. They're starting to get serious about budget negotiations here. How much attention is that getting as you've been following the budget?
Yeah, it certainly seems to be the hot button issue for a lot of people who want to see changes to what the governor proposed. The governor, in proposing to end this program, the state would save several hundred millions of dollars, which is really significant this year as the state faces a pretty significant budget shortfall without some serious changes. So there's a lot of advocates, as you mentioned in your reporting here, that are really pushing for keeping this program. They say the benefits of it outweigh the state getting rid of it, and it's a pretty necessary piece because, you know, they argue that a lot of these people may actually not end up being able to obtain health insurance after the state removes it. The governor's office, though, is concerned that federal reimbursements are going to be ended for this type of program, and that there are some other cases where people can obtain health insurance that don't have to be through a state program. So, you know, it certainly seems to be getting a lot of attention, at least on the activist side. We know a lot of Latino lawmakers really want to see it stay in, but at the end of the day, it's a several $100 million program, and you know, there's going to have to be a lot of other changes made by state lawmakers to fit this back into the state budget next year.
And it is kind of interesting that while Governor Pritzker, stands out in direct contrast to the Trump administration, that he's always calling out the administration, especially over its immigration policies, this is one policy in Illinois where he's actually taken a lot of heat for providing health care benefits for this population. And as he is apparently weighing whether or not to run for president himself in a few years, that he would pick this program to just start phasing out, saying it's a budget consideration and not really a political consideration. But is it? Is it a political consideration on his part, do you think?
It certainly seems like the governor's reading the room and reading the polls, because generally over time, polls have favored Donald Trump's administration's immigration policies. We've heard, though, for years that Illinois Republicans have been criticizing this immigrant health care program in Illinois, especially when the program far exceeded its budget expectations and wound up costing well over $1 billion and was including
$1.6 billion, I think, over 3 or 4 fiscal years. Yeah.
Exactly. And several people were benefiting from this program who actually should not have been eligible. So it was riddled with mistakes. And I think that's where the governor is partially like, okay, we need to rein this in for those reasons. But the governor really, since Donald Trump's election, has notably kind of toughened up some of his rhetoric on immigration. He has said very forcefully that he agrees with the Trump administration that anybody who is in this country convicted of a violent crime and they're here illegally, they need to be deported. That's not really a statement that we heard the governor say a lot publicly, at least in the last 6 years or so. So I think the governor is largely just kind of reading where people in the United States fall on the immigration issue, realizing that providing a lot of state benefits for people who are not legally in the United States in some cases isn't the most popular thing in the world. And, this was an opportunity to kind of address some of those concerns that people on the other side of the aisle have, as well as, find a place to cut a pretty substantial amount out of the state spending in a tight budget year.
So with that, we will end it there for this edition of Capital Cast. Ben Szalinski and Jade Aubrey, as always, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.
Capital Cast is a production of Capital News Illinois, a public affairs reporting project of the Illinois Press Foundation with funding from the Robert R. McCormick Foundation. Until next time, on behalf of the entire Capital News Illinois team, this is Peter Hancock saying thank you for listening.